Hello everyone, my name is Kishore. I will be talking about intent realization in self serve platforms. I'm a software engineer at Netflix. I have been working there since 2018, and I'm part of the middleware infrastructure stream where we provide infra services to our Netflix content and studio engineering teams. We also own the open source Netflix Conductor project, which I used to be a maintainer for, and most recently, I've been working at the intersection of data and workflows and ontologies. So, what do I mean by intent realization? Simply put, it's all about bridging the gap between what a user wants to do and what they are able to do on a platform. So, usually we have two different personas working on the platform, right? We have platform owners and then the developers or the users. The platform owners and the developers tend to have a common set of goals. Platform owners want to be able to rapidly onboard new users, improve the overall developer experience, and maximize the utilization of the platform. Whereas developers, on the other hand, want to be able to easily onboard to the platform, to be able to easily reason the components of the platform or easily work with them. But their goals are not usually aligned. Platform owners are usually concerned with issues like how to keep the platform stable or how to scale for a variety of load patterns. Or day to day, they are concerned with issues like how to avoid noisy neighbors or rate limiting, etc. Whereas developers are on the opposite side of this. They want to be able to provide flexibility in rapid development or focus on their business requirements and overall spend as little time as possible on the platform and more time on their business use cases. And moreover, they would probably need to extend the platform in a ways that the platform owners haven't imagined earlier. But the reality is often slightly different. Imagine a new user trying to onboard to your platform by themselves. They are exposed to a plenty of options, right? And are left alone to figure out the path themselves. And moreover, not all the users onboard the same. The user preferences vary a lot. Some users just want you to show the code, and some prefer documentation, and so and so. So while platform owners truly care about developer experience and spend a lot of time building all of these different tooling and interfaces, that won't completely solve the developer experience part of the problem. So if you look at the range of the developer experience, on the far left, we have terrible experience with no documentation or limited to no documentation at all. A very complex getting started process that sometimes maybe even doesn't even work. While on the other side, we have some platforms who overdo it. They provide a flashy and complex user interfaces. Maybe sometimes they are easy to use, but they are very hard to learn. There are lots going on, and sometimes the documentation is really like huge, which is probably looks like a book, and you had to spend a lot of time going through that. So, getting to the gist, of developer experience is usually a complex trial and error process with a ton of user feedback, and is usually only achieved as the platform matures. And we have noticed great improvement in developer experience with this very simple intuition, which is always start with the intent. It looks pretty simple, but a lot of the platform owners fail to recognize it early on. A user almost always comes to your platform with an intent. It probably could be along the lines of, I want to provision this pipeline, or I want to create this workflow, or I want to update something that I already have. Let's use this simple case study to take a closer look. We have a data movement platform that allows users to move the data from operational tables to the data lakes. And they want the data to be enriched with the GraphQL data as it is being moved. Again, the platform itself is not the focus here. I'm not going to get into the details of how the platform works, but let's see how some of the developer intents can be used to as an example. So one of the user intent goes like this: they would like to provision a data pipeline which takes the data from a particular MySQL table and moves it to a table in the data lake and being enriched with a GraphQL query provided by them in a set of environments they would prefer. That's a lot of data to collect from the user, right? And we almost always end up with a YAML file. Like YAML by itself, YAML is the often the preferred choice, and there's nothing wrong with it itself. It's just that we tend to overdo it and let this scope creep into it without much concern. That makes it difficult to work with. So let's take a closer look at part of the config that's often used. Like let's say we are defining the infrastructure for the pipeline itself. It's really important to pause and ask questions like, is it really important for onboarding? Can we abstract away parts of it or maybe in entirety so that users don't have to care about it? And moreover, I think it's important to think how much of it can be abstracted away until or unless a user asks for it. This is a very difficult game of balancing the control or the number of knobs you want to provide to your users versus reducing the user's burden in onboarding. And we have learned over and over that it's usually much simpler to stick with sensible defaults and abstract away most of the components. And this is important because like we w- we want to be really focused on reducing the scope of the YAML that is required for onboarding. So once we have the configuration captured in YAML or JSON or maybe even code, we have used a bunch of different tools like platform SDKs or web UIs, or maybe even tools like Chef and Puppet, the configuration management tools, etc. And AWS CloudFormation is another good example. Again, the focus is not on the tooling itself, right? But how we can resolve the intent and let the user make the best use of these tools to get it much quicker, to make it much easier for them. In for this particular use case, I believe we started with an SDK, but we eventually ended with this. So going back to the intent, one of the requests from the user is to provision a data pipeline. So we have built a Gradle plugin to minimize the overhead and make it a very simple one-step process. Again, the goal is to make it as intuitive to the user as possible. With the Gradle plugin, that is very easy to integrate since we use Gradle in all of our Java projects, and the provision is the command that is very easy to reason, which kind of ties to their intent. So that makes it very easy to do a whole bunch of stuff. And we chose Gradle plugin because it abstracts away a lot of the stuff that's happening under the hood. Like for example, the provision command will do a lot of stuff like it reads the config file, validates it, and starts the workflow under the hood, which is not visible to the users, to be clear. But the workflow does the heavy lifting of provisioning the pipeline, checking the status of it, and checkpointing it every once in a while, and do a lot of other stuff asynchronously while we return a response to the user as soon as the workflow is started. And the user can check the status of the provisioning because it usually takes a few minutes, and they can go back and check the status with the same Gradle command all the time. And an important thing to keep in mind about the user's configuration is that it's not static. It evolves over the time along with the requirements from the platform. And one of the key advantages of using the Gradle plugin we got is now that the configuration is part of the user's code repo. And by being part of the repo, uh, our users got many advantages out of the box, like their configuration is now part of their code reviews. they have Git versioning. And we didn't stop there. We didn't, uh, apart from the Git versioning, we have pushed our users to have explicit versioning for user config files. And this is important because there might be a case where our users want to evolve their pipelines while being able to backtrack. And there might be a window where multiple versions of the pipelines coexist for a while, which is totally fine, which is what they are looking for. And as the users continue to work with the platform, they will most likely come back with more requirements. And the platform owner's job doesn't end, or even the developer experience doesn't end with just with the onboarding. So we should consider for pathways for them to easily evolve the use case. Maybe they would just start simple and they would eventually want a lot more stuff from the platform, and they should be able to easily evolve their configuration. And also most important is to support the user's need for migrations. For example, they might want to leverage a latest Flink processor, or maybe some other processor that they want to make as part of the data pipeline, and the platform should be able to support that with very minimal overhead. I want to talk about some of the tangentials. To begin with, validations. Validations is a tricky subject, and it feels like we are chasing a moving target. And we have run into a number of support requests that could otherwise be easily caught with validations. And one of the first things and the easy things to do is start by measuring the number of validation issues you are running into. That provides a lot of insight into your developer's experience. Again, this is tied to the goal of eliminating the guesswork for your users. And as a platform owner, like, you want your users going to and fro, and avoid the frustration that causes it. Simply put, if the users are failing your validations like more than 3 times as they're onboarding, you're probably doing something wrong. And also, the validation evolves as the platform goes. And it's really important to keep it standardized and simple enough so that it can be easily evolved with the growing needs. We have done this mistake of using multiple different types of validations in a project that became quite complex. And whenever we want to improve it, it kind of became a hassle. And finally, validations without meaningful error messages is not helpful at all. And the other tangential I want to talk about is migrations. Here, the intent has super low energy, right? Or maybe even doesn't even exist at all. It's more often it's like platform owners who would be chasing their users for months sometimes to complete a migration. There will always be that one or two use cases that are at the tail end of the migration. And here we have learned that the more time and effort platform owners put into the migration, the simpler it makes for the developers and the faster the migration moves. And I want to provide a good example of Spring Boot migration at Netflix, where the platform actually went ahead to create excellent tooling that matches with the intent. So they provided a simple Gradle plugin to developers where if you just run the plugin, it makes automatically makes the required code changes and creates a PR for us. It won't work all the time, but then it it is such a great time saver across the board that we have migrated within just our team tens of different applications very easily. And this is completely different from our experience a couple of years ago with the same Spring Boot migrations. They have simply and truly wowed us. And as we wrap up, I want to call out some of the anti patterns that get in the way of intent realization and developer experience. Redirects, like, I mean, sometimes they are unavoidable, but strive really, really hard to avoid sending users elsewhere. It definitely gets in the way of their onboarding and it's a bad experience. And if you have too many knobs, like for example, in Conductor, we have a task configuration with too many knobs that often confuse our users. Their intent was to create a simple task to do something, but all of these knobs got in the way. And the tool overload, like you probably don't need many different user interfaces, and different use cases might benefit from a different tooling, right? For Conductor, which is a workflow system, we have a visual workflow builder, whereas for pipeline provisioning, we have used Gradle plugins. It's not always the same thing. Poor error handling, this is most likely the number one cause for our support burden. And we tend to realize that we should consciously improve error messages over and over. So that's something that makes the job much easier if you start your projects with that. And your getting started should be very simple. I have personally seen many platforms get this wrong, where the getting started can be complex or there are bugs in the getting started process. So this is where you are selling the platform, and that should be very simple and it should just work. So the key takeaways from this talk are: always start with the intent. I've said it over and over, but yeah, always link your developer experience to your intent, and everything you do should be tied to that. And if you can build tooling to lift many birds at once, always prefer to do that, and your users will thank you for that. And that brings us to the end of our session, and thanks for attending. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn here. Thank you.